Okay, then we continue to discuss this paper. Do banks care about the ESG firm capital structure in the green era? This paper was written by Stephen Walls. I think he is a PhD candidate and almost a graduate from Columbia University this year. I think this is his job market paper. When you apply to a faculty in the university, usually they have the good paper to be presented in the international conference. And I think this is the paper he present. And I feel that the topic is very well. So I pick it to our seminar that we can learn something new. Okay. First of all, is the paper overview. Why he present this title? Because bank CEOs emphasize their commitment to stakeholders. The stakeholders actually include not just shareholders. It includes your employee, your community, and your investor as a whole, including like creditors, shareholders, your employee, your community as a whole. So actually, this is a very important commitment. And what's the commitment is? It is like climate change and ESG commitment. For instance, JP Morgan claimed to provide $280 billion to sustainable business in 2021. But the question is, relative to bond market, are bank loans sensitive to ESG? I think the author already observed that the bank seems always lend to firms which is profitable rather than ESG orientated. So this is the angle that the author can examine whether the bank CEOs really doing something they commit. So if the policymakers force banks to internalize the ESG preference, how would lending outcome change? Because they observe maybe not. If the policymaker force banks to do this, can we see something different? So this is the question. And they find that higher ESG firms increasingly use bonds relative to bank loans. This is very interesting, right? And also bond yields are more sensitive than loan rates to ESG score. This is the author's finding, which is very important. And so he provides a benchmark externality adjustment to trace out the counterfactors effect on bank lending volumes. This is the quick way you can take. About the literature backdrop, the authors separate into three types. The first type is ESG and the green new. This is a new term because we usually use premium, which is the benchmark rate. If you about the benchmark rate, you have premium. This is a rate. But the green news similar to the premium, but it came from like ESG or green loan or green lending, which is different. So this does any relationship between ESG and the green news? Because it isolates a bank bonds green news. You can see the paper always very new, 2021. We can also take a look at that paper later. And also this paper relates to capital structure because you use the bank debt or you use public debt, which is the capital structure. Bank debt actually is a short term, but public debt normally represent the long-term borrowing. And also the third part is ESG-based capital requirement. So this paper provides an estimate of loan flows under ESG capital requirement. So there have three categories related to this literature. The first one is ESG and ingredients and capital structure and capital requirement. So there have a lot of database combined to each other, including ESG score from Refinity, and the time period is from 2011 to 2021. You know, the ESG score actually being active in almost these 10 days. If before 2010, there are very few firms disclose this score. So if you want to collect the scores, it will be more completely from 2011. So this is the reason why the author using ESG score only from 2011, because before that, you cannot have a complete data. Very few firms, you know, review this and disclose this score because they know nothing about climate change and they don't care. But the commitment being more significantly in this decade. And other than that, your financial statement come from CompuState. And your bond data came from Mergent FISG. And your loan data came from DSCAN, syndicated loan. And this is the four database they merged together. And about how to calculate the loan share, which is the loan divided by total debt. How to calculate the spread, loan bond spread, which is the loan yield to maturity minus a bond yield to maturity. So if the spread is higher, either because the loan rate is high, or otherwise it might come from the bond rate is low. Also, it not necessarily be that the loan rate is always high. It come from the bond rate is low. If you see an increasing spread, that may come from the bond rate because the bond rate is low because the bond market is sensitive to ESG, and the loan market always being insensitive. So that means the loan rate is always fixed. So the facts about ESG and debt structure, then we can connect the both dimension. On the left panel, you can see the ESG bucket. They separated the ESG score into 5 buckets. On the right-hand side, this is a higher this the ESG bucket. And they use the lowest band-aid ratio. So that means firm with the highest ESG, they are able to assess from the other market rather than bank loan. So if you are on the right-hand side, the highest ESG bucket, and these firms usually use other source rather than bank debt. And when your ESG is decreasing to the left side, which is the lowest ESG bucket, and you can see that these firms always rely on the bank debt. So we can see the decreasing relationship in between. So on the right-hand side, the right panel, you can see here, there is a very meaningful finding here. The highest ESG score bucket firm here is associate the highest spread between loan and the bonds. So that means this bucket firm might borrow from the other source, which is the bonds capital market, and they raises the fund with the lowest year to maturity. So this is a very interesting finding that the highest ESG buckets is associated with the highest spread between loan and bonds. So the fact one is ESG firm use relative less band debt on the that panel, and highest ESG bucket firm obtain cheaper bonds relative to band debt. So higher ESG acts the use less loan. This is the regression results here. So you can see the significantly negatively coefficient on ESG bucket. High ESG bucket always use lower loan rate relative to total debt and have a lower loan, however, have a higher bonds. Okay. No matter you control fixed effect, year effect, or rating fixed effect, the results always there, doesn't change. But this result might have some concern about the endogeneity. We have mentioned that in the last paper, which is a very important part in academia paper. If something affected the ESG scores, and this score has been related to your inheritance, the result will not be robust. So to make sure that our result is robust, we have to check the endogeneity concerns. So this paper used another instrument variables, which is the competitive ESG scores. I think this is a very smart way to reduce the concern about the endogeneity. So the authors try to calculate the ESG score from the competitors. If the competitors with the same size, with the same technology, and with the same ESG score as yours, you might be affected by your competitor because you are in the same industries and the results might be correlated to each other. So the author used the competitive ESG as the IV, instrument variable, to instrument the ESG bucket in the first stage. And column 1 is the first stage, but this stage will be hidden, will not show in the table. So we can directly see the column 3 about the results. So the first stage, you get the ESG bucket head. And in the second stage, you can replace the ESG bucket head to ESG bucket. So here is the result about the second stage, which is significantly negatively to long rate, long shares as well. So the result doesn't change, right? If we use OLS in column 2, we can see it is significantly negatively to this results, right? But if we use IV 2-stage, the first stage, we calculate and estimate the ESG bucket head and replace the bucket head in the second stage to regress another one. So we can see the results doesn't change a lot, even though the magnitude change, but the sign is always there. So higher ESG bucket is related to lower band debt ratio. So this is another testing about whether higher ESG is related to cheaper bonds, which is the lower year to maturity. And the authors are using the dependent variable, which is the loan rate minus bond rate spread, which is the difference in between. So we can see that the ESG score is positively related to loan minus bonds spread, which means that if your ESG score is high, then you might be able to borrow the cheaper bonds, which have the lower year to maturity than your loan minus bonds spread is getting larger. So we can get a positively relationship in between. Higher ESG score, you can see the higher spread in between, which is the competitive advantage from the bonds. If we control the maturity difference, the result doesn't change, right? We control different fixed effect, the result doesn't change. So we can see the size always there and the significance is always there as well. Okay, so this is a very important finding here. So the mechanism discussion is what drives the higher elasticity for bonds market? Is that the bank deposit are always information insensitive. So banks are ESG arbitragers because they don't care the ESG. And the bond markets actually better price ESG growth option at firms. And also high ESG firms have a lower willingness to pay for the financing and continuity. But effect remains after controlling for credit risk. So following that, the paper checked the loan volume, which is another important indicator relative to the spread, whether the loan volume change. So here is the calculations steps about how to measure the loan volumes and to check this dimension. And the finding is also interesting because you can see the y-axis here is a percentage change in loan volume. This is the change rate. But the x-axis related to different sectors, including construction and the other sectors. So if the loan volumes is getting lower, then you will see like the brown color, the pink color. If the loan volume is getting higher, then you will see the green, blue, and green colors. And the number is ESG scores. So we can see that loan volume declined about 22% by construction firms here. Here is the ESG score, which is the 33, but the loan volume is getting less. And we can see the highest loan volume, which is located in manufacturer firm, and the ESG score is 43. So higher ESG scores actually is positively related to the percentage change in loan volume. So this is another meaningful finding here for the bank and have the incentive to lend to the sectors which have higher ESG score. And we have some important conclusions from this paper. The first one is high ESG firms utilize the bond market more than bank to finance their projects. Okay, this is a really interesting the angle in this paper. And also, one standard deviation increase in ESG actually can translate it to around 80 to 20 PPS cheaper bonds relative to loans, which is very sensitive. You have a one standard deviation increase in ESG score that you will get a lower, about 18 to 20 BPS cheaper rate relative to loans. And the third finding is the loan bond gradients, which is the spread, provide a benchmark for regulators when considering the design of enhanced capital requirement, which is a policy implication in this paper. If we can see that it's very important, then how would you do for the regulator, for the policymaker? Because you can, design, your contract from the capital requirement. Then the bank will be willing to lend their funds to green firms, because otherwise you might have to have a higher capital requirement. So finally, the greenness regulator cost could introduce potentially distortionate effect and are sensitive to ESG rating stability. So this paper have 4 important conclusions, and they have a very important implication for the sectors and for the regulator, for the policymaker. And also, this paper have robust finding, which has been examined again and again by including to test whether they have endogeneity concerns. Also, with all these concerns, we can see that this paper is very unique and consistent, which is a very good paper. Okay, any questions? Question from this paper?